I want to welcome you in Conversation with Goodera for our campaign on Earth Day. So how are you, Paul?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you so much for taking out your time to have a conversation with us today. It is one of our absolute honor to have you and your nonprofit Oke Charity with us. We know the awesome work that you guys have been doing with your end or nonprofit, but I would like you to tell our audience a little bit about you and your nonprofit, the amazing work that you do, the place that you are based out of, and your missions and your goals.
A lot more rewarding.
That was absolutely amazing to know. It was very inspiring. And so now let's begin with today's conversation.
Okay.
So every new year, we set up resolutions for our own health and fitness. This is April, and it's never too late, I think, to set up resolution for our planet's overall health as well. So this brings me to my first question. Could you tell me one simple act or an earth-friendly resolution that you wish everyone should take up?
I've had to think about this. I think everybody should just look under their feet and look at the soil that's beneath their feet. Because depending on where you are in the world and even just where you are within a certain community, the soil under your feet is going to look a lot different. And we kind of use that as a basis for everything that we do, especially with being a kids gardening charity. First and foremost, looking at the soil that's at the schools and whether a garden will even survive if you plant one there is key to what we do.
Great. Thank you for that amazing resolution. I hope people listen to this conversation and pledge to do their simple bit for our planet.
Yeah.
So in this regard, I want to know how your nonprofit is working for this cause.
So we basically base everything from ground up. So like I say, when we first do a consultation with the school to understand why they want a school garden, we do a bit of a tour of the school to understand where it's going to be located, and we look at what the ground's looking like. And more often than not, we use raised beds in our school gardens, which are basically beds that are traditionally made out of timber. We've transitioned to metal beds, but they're about 1/2 meter high, and we fill that with really good compost and soil, because it gives whatever's grown in the bed a chance of growing. If we were just trying to grow in the ground itself, nothing would grow basically. And then as part of the build, we also put in compost bins into the school. And so that starts the conversations with the kids, is that, if the soil is going to degrade over time because the vegetables are sucking up all the nutrients, where's the next lot of nutrients coming from? And you need compost. And where does the compost come from? Food waste. So there's lots of food waste in the schools. So rather than that all going to the bin, it can be diverted to the compost and then into the beds and grow new vegetables. So you're starting a cycle in the schools, and you're getting the inquiry happening with the kids to understand the food that they've just eaten is growing from food they would have chucked to the bin like previously. And then that gets on to the whole topic of food waste. And especially in New Zealand, there's over 150,000 tons of food waste per year in New Zealand, which then I think equates to like 4% of our climate change issues. So it's like, if you can address that small 4% can be wiped off. And you've got to start with the kids. So if they start learning this at 5, 6, 7-year-olds and understanding that, we can't chuck our food in the bin, it can go into compost and that can grow new vegetables. I mean, that's as good an education as you're going to give kids as they can possibly ask, I think.
This initiative is actually very noble. I think the base, the foundation of personality, it starts from our childhood only. So
Yes.
if you are allowing one kid to know its soil, how it feels, what are its importances, how soil is so important to our living, our well-being. That is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And I am really inspired by the work that you guys are doing with the kids.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
yeah.
we've built 20 school gardens now. And that's given over 12,000 kids access to a garden space that they might not have otherwise had, because I mean, lots of homes don't necessarily have gardens anymore, whereas in the past, a couple of generations ago, it was a given that there would be a garden at home to grow their own produce. But over the last couple of generations, that's disappeared. And so we're trying to use these spaces as well to get previous generations, like the elderly generation in our local community, to come into the schools and use these spaces to teach the kids these skills that are being lost. And you can't necessarily teach them from a book. The best way to learn is hands-on. And if you feel in one hand soil that's been degraded and got no goodness in it, and in the other hand you can squeeze the soil and you're like squeezing the goodness out of it, there's your inspiration for the kids in just a few seconds of just feeling the different soils. And I sometimes struggle to understand that you can get a child to understand this within seconds, but you can't teach a 65-year-old farmer the need to look after their soil. You know, it's kind of frustrating.
I am inspired actually, because in today's concrete world, it is very hard to find soil.
Yeah.
Everywhere there is concrete and pollution. And even that day in news, I heard that the soil quality is reducing, and by like the next 40 years, we'll be losing so much of soil that we'll have very less amount of resources for us to consume.
Yeah.
So this is a much needed initiative, and I really thank you for taking up this.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely needed in New Zealand because our number one industry is agriculture. So it's kind of, so not only do we need new people coming through the industry, and not, kids don't want to be farmers these days because there's no devices or tablets involved. So you've got to find people from somewhere, and also just training people and getting understanding that we need to look after our land, our soil better, because if you want to grow food, you can't keep pumping it full of chemicals. It's got to come naturally. So I think it's getting there. It's definitely, people are listening, and we just hope it happens sooner rather than later.
Okay, that was a really awesome answer. So my next question would be, like, we have seen food environment policies getting hampered. Like, I can now see that there is a huge link between an economy and the environment. The environment provides resources to the economy, and it also acts as a sink for emission and its waste. But
Yes.
the assessments of these environmental policies are often hampered. So I want to know your views on this. Have environmental issues sunk into the background because of the bad economy?
In some cases, I would say yes. So, I think if you just go to a community level and you look at families that are struggling, they may have given environmental issues a consideration a year or 2 years ago, but now with the cost of living rising dramatically over the last 6 to 12 months, their priorities have shifted, and so they're not really that fussed about food or what food they can consume. They just want to make sure that they can feed their families, and then you get up to local government level, and again, because their budgets have been slashed and their policies have been altered, so they may have budgets set aside for environmental impacts and studies and projects, the first things to go when you've got budget cuts are the environmental projects and stuff that are long-term fixes, and they're like, no, we've got roads to fix now and we've got this to fix now. They're going to be the priority. So I think that's definitely, the short-term fixes are going to have long-term impacts on the environment. But then on the other hand, is, for instance, the price of petrol has skyrocketed. And so here in New Zealand, the government's put in place public transport costs are being cut in half, so that people can afford to go catch public transport. And it's kind of, okay, initially that's just for like 3 months, but if enough people then transition to public transport because of the cost, it may get government thinking, people do use it if they can afford it. And again, so if you get more people on public transport, then less people in cars. So there's a long-term impact there. And I mean, just the issue with Ukraine-Russia war, it's the cost of food is going to go through the roof because so much maize and product is exported from Russia and Ukraine that so many countries rely on. So that's going to have a devastating impact. But then, is it the push that countries need to get their own house in order to start, okay, maybe we shouldn't be relying so much on imported foods? What do we need to put in place to grow our own food and reduce those food pipelines? And because that all comes with environmental impacts, shipping food all around the country, which again comes back to what we do, is trying to get kids to understand food can be grown locally, and it tastes so much better if it's grown locally, because you're eating it within minutes or hours of taking it out of the ground, so it hasn't lost all its flavour. So again, we're trying to do our little bit in the bottom of the world in New Zealand to educate kids on, not only are you doing food waste and composting and all the other learning, you're kind of helping to reduce pipelines of food insecurities as well. So I think it depends what spin you want to look at it. If you want to look at it from a negative perspective of like, the world's going to end in 60 years because we've got no soil left, it's like, okay. Or you can look at it positively and say, look, we've got 60 years to sort this out, and it's like, what are we going to do about it? And I like to think positively and just go, look, we can sort this out. And you can't really wait on governments or hire CEOs or anything to sort it out. It's got to be bottom up. We can sort it out grassroots. And it's just getting that bit across to say, no, you can do your bit. And those little bits all add up to one big bit, you know.
I think Gandhiji's quote seems proper here. If you want to see a change, then you have to be the change.
Yeah.
And you are making that change with the kids, I can see. So we just can't wait for the government, for the economy to take up initiatives to save the environment. We have to do on our own. And if I start, and if seeing me, some others start, this will create a whole chain. And I think ultimately the impact will be huge.
Yeah. I mean, I'm excited by the next generation coming through, because they're not prepared to just sit on their hands and wait for things to change or things to happen. They're more than happy to stand up and say, no, we need to make things happen now. And yeah, that's cool.
That's very inspiring, I must say. So coming to the next question, I also want you to take this platform to enlighten our audience on how can people authentically work for this cause. Like you have already mentioned, but I want you to go a little bit deep into this.
Yeah. I think everyone can start in their own backyard, basically. Everyone can start on their balconies, at the kitchen sink. They can have a compost bin, a bokashi bin, just to start collecting their own food waste. And then people say, but then I've got nowhere to put it. I'm like, what's the next step then? Is that if you haven't got a compost bin at home, or set up a community compost bin, and it's okay, but then where do we put the compost? It's like, well, then you're going to need a garden. Who's going to set up a garden? So you set up a chain reaction just by doing your one little thing at home, is that it starts other questions being raised, and it's kind of, okay, it's too hard to set up a community garden. I'm like, well, just do it on the side of the street then. It's like, it's just find a space to grow something. There's always a space on top of office buildings. Set up a rooftop garden. I think the biggest thing is to stop putting hurdles in the way of saying, I can't do this because of this. And again, I bring that back to what we do with our school gardens. We started off with a small garden package of a few raised beds and a couple of tools. And then I'll go back and say, oh, the school garden's not running. I'm like, why not? Oh, we didn't have this. Okay, so the next school garden build, we included that in there. So we knew that they can use that as an excuse. And then when we came up against another excuse, we made sure that that was answered at the next school garden. So now when we build, we pretty much got all the excuses covered from a school as to why it can't prosper and be successful. And you can take that home as well. I mean, kids will say to their parents, oh, we should have a school garden. And they're like, it's too expensive. But because they've learned at school that you can do it really easily, they're like, okay. And because kids can be quite determined and wrap their parents around their little finger. I know, because I've got a 7-year-old son, and he can be quite the dictator at home. So basically, kids do have a lot of persuasion at home. So if they've done something at school and really enjoyed it, they've got a chance of making a difference at home. So we should try this. And then once people do try it, they realize actually it's not that hard. Because again, when we approach a school, they say, oh, we're going to have to spend so much time maintaining and looking after this garden. And I'm like, plants don't grow that quick if you have to be out there every single day. It's kind of, you might have to water the plants every couple of days, but that's it. And once they get over that time issue of their time is precious, why would they waste it on a garden? When in fact, a garden's really rewarding. And once you've been in there and you've got your hands stuck into the dirt, they start to understand, I feel better in myself from being in this space. And then they're like, why didn't I start this 20 years ago or 15 years ago? It's kind of, I should have done it years ago. And then when they're cooking with their own vegetables that they've grown themselves, they're like, this just come out of the ground 30 minutes ago and it's on my plate. It's amazing. It's just that you just get so passionate about it because you're rewarded with these amazing vegetables and these fruits that taste so much better than store-bought ones. And yeah, you literally can be life-changing. So we built a school garden at a school for disabled children a couple of years ago, and the children there go from ages 5 to 20-year-olds. And before we put the garden in, some of the children would be physically sick if they saw a salad in front of them. It just triggered them, and so they wouldn't eat healthily, which in turn impacted their overall health. Once they got their own garden and they was growing it and they tasted it straight off the plant in the garden, they was eating salads, which in turn made them inquire about other foods that they've been missing out on, like, how does that taste? How does this taste? And they started eating them, and it just changed them. It just changed their physical well-being, it changed their mental well-being. And it's like, if I don't build another school garden ever again in my life, I know that I've impacted those students for the rest of their life, and that's my job done. But me being me, I'm not going to stop. There's 2,500 schools in New Zealand, so it's a lifetime job of trying to get a school in every garden, but hopefully over the next few years I won't have to do it on my own, and we'll get more help.
I think what you have mentioned, I can get this, that if you automatically care for the planet's health and fitness, well-being, then that will indirectly redirect to our well-being as well.
Yeah.
Because if you care for the nature, if you care for the soil, it will give good resources, and with those resources we can be healthy. So I think it's a win-win situation, and spending some time for it, like giving excuses like not having time for it, I don't think that is too coward, I think. So
Yeah.
And not only it will help in our well-being physically, I think it will also help us mentally, because gardening, caring for the plants, touching the soil, it helps a soothing effect.
It,
In our, people have lots of depression, lots of mental issues. I think that will also help them recover from these troubling issues.
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at how COVID has affected the world over the last couple of years, and a lot of people have gone to plants and gardening as an outlet for that depression that has been built up over the last couple of years. So now it's like Instagram is like full of people setting up their own gardens and people are going plant crazy. My wife is now a crazy plant lady. There's just plants everywhere, but it's because it does, and I think it's been proven in studies that using the hands and connecting with the soil does have an impact mentally. I mean, I think it's in Sky in the UK, they now give green pharmacy passes, so you can go and get free fruit and green access to gardens and all this kind of thing as a way of helping. And yeah, it's a great space to be in for, especially for kids that have been stuck in a house for 3 months of lockdown. The last thing you want is to go to school and be stuck in a classroom. So having an outlet, a garden where they can go and just not even do anything, just sit there and just chill out, is a great thing for the kids.
The things that you have mentioned right now are absolutely doable, and I don't think anyone needs any excuses to not do it. And as a human being who continuously consume from the planet Earth, I think it is our topmost duty and it is our obligation towards the planet to do at least a little bit, a minute bit for itself.
Yeah.
So I think that was all my questions, and I have thoroughly enjoyed our enriching conversation today. I am pretty sure your answers have not only cleared the mentioned questions, but it has also addressed a lot other issues regarding this course. I hope you had a great time as well.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. It's great to just be able to tell people what we're doing, and hopefully someone will be inspired to get it going in their community, which is all we can ask for.
Thank you so much for taking out the time. It was really a pleasure for us to host you today. Before ending this conversation though, I would like to ask you for a message for all those potential volunteers who are willing to give their time, give their efforts to this cause. Like, I want you to tell them, like, their bare minimum contribution can bring a life-changing impact to the beneficiaries and your organization as a whole. So I want you to give a message saying that their bare minimum contribution can bring a life-changing impact.
Yeah, I mean, we operate on volunteers. All our school garden builds are done through volunteers, and you don't have to have all the skills in the world to be able to volunteer. Any skills that you can have, that you can contribute to Oke or the non-profits, are always welcome, because we often run on very limited budgets. So not only do we love support in building the school gardens, but we love volunteer support to help with everything that runs the charity, from our social media to our marketing. So yeah, even though you might think, oh, I don't have any skills that I can offer, just have a talk to your local charity, because just a conversation may draw out some key skills that they could use, and that can help them to carry on the good work that they're doing.
Thank you. May you keep smiling, and may you and your nonprofit keep on doing this amazing work and inspiring children all around the world. Thank
We'll
you.
try our best. Thank you.